Good morning. Brother Chad Long here from Delhi Baptist Church, and I hope that you're having a good morning so far, and I'm glad that you're with us if you are. Glad to be studying the Bible together, and we are in Hebrews chapter 4, I believe is where we made it to. I've had a weekend to forget, but I'll just say as you study the book of Hebrews with me, this is not a book I would point anybody to if you're a young Christian. If you've not been saved very long, probably wouldn't point them to it either if they were lost and looking to get saved, because Hebrews is a very deep and difficult book to understand for a young Christian. Now, it doesn't have to be. The reason it is because there's a lot of references to the Old Testament and a lot of references to law, not because you need the law to be saved, but because he's writing to a people who trusted the law, who he's trying to get to trust Christ implicitly. Now, and I believe Paul wrote it, but if I'm right, when Paul wrote this, he was drawing on his own experiences as a Jew and trying to talk to believers, in large part believers, who were struggling with this, with their own faith, because they believed the law and they had trusted it so long that to believe Christ seemed awkward to them. And they wanted to try to marry the two together. They wanted to marry law and legalism with Christ and grace, and they were struggling with this. So he uses a lot of examples. Some of them are over my head, I'll be honest with you. Some of them I don't fully grasp. I get the idea, the general idea. But for example, in chapter 4, you're going to see the word rest 8 times. But rest had a several different meanings. I mean, for example, you're going to see the Sabbath mentioned here. And this is a reference to when God did all that God did in 6 days and then rested on the 7th. Well, while that is a picture of eternal rest, because when we rest in salvation, we're trusting in what God did and then he rested. It's just another way of saying he was finished. After 6 days, God was finished. And so he rested. There wasn't any more work to do. And next week starts for us, but it doesn't start for him. That's it for him. Well, I said all that to say this. Some of the types of rest mentioned are not based on eternal rest. And some of them are. And it's hard to follow exactly what he's talking about throughout this chapter. So it takes a bit of concentration and being careful on my part especially. Here's what I do know. The rest in Canaan was a picture of eternal rest that was coming, but obviously they didn't get into Canaan and rest. They got into Canaan and had to fight. So that's where it does get confusing, and I'll admit that to you up front. But at the same time, we know what all this was pointing to, because we're looking backwards, and that's why in a lot of ways I don't worry too much about it if I miss a particular point or don't fully understand it, because I understand the end result now. And so I may not catch all the ways he's building up to it. So as we look at chapter 4, what I will tell you is I do not believe any of these verses in any of these chapters is pointing at a loss of salvation. I do think some people missed the mark based on their unbelief, and we saw that at the end of chapter 3. In fact, where we left off, here it is. The end of chapter 3, he says, verse 19, so we see they could not enter in because of unbelief. Well, entering into the promised land was not the same thing as entering into heaven. But there is a picture there of it, and we see that with Moses and Joshua. The picture was Moses, who taught them in all things law, could not get them over the river into the promised land. So you do see a picture of Christ through Joshua, who is a type of Christ, and you do see rest here in the land as an example of eternal rest to come. But the best example I can give you, if I'm understanding these things right, is that when we got saved, there is the promise of eternal life, but we don't immediately jump into heaven. There's still work to do. We're in that promised land rest period, but we're still here. And so there's work to do. Just as with Israel. When Israel got into Canaan, they had to fight for the land that was promised them. And they had to take a stand for their God. And they had to honor Him, follow Him, love Him, and show their belief in Him with obedience. Well, Christians are to do the same thing. When we accept Christ, okay, we've crossed over the Jordan. And we've entered into the land, so to speak. As Christians, though, we've joined a church and we've become soldiers. Did you know the Bible calls us soldiers? And there's a work to do. And there's a stand to take. And there's a God to honor and obey. And if we believe Him and we believe everything we claim to believe, then we ought to understand that we have a job to do and work to do. Now, if we don't fully believe, well then, yes, you have something to fear because you didn't truly put your trust and faith in Jesus Christ. One of the problems I have with some of these denominations running around, and I'm not going to name them. You guys are smart. You can study these things. I shouldn't have to call out a denomination because I love a great many people that are in some of these. But the leadership of them, what grieves me about some of them is they will have you so confused about whether or not you can truly trust Christ with your salvation or if you should add things to it, works or water or anything. My trust is entirely in Jesus Christ. Okay, He saved me. Not Him plus a baptistry, not Him plus the law, not Him plus a particular set of works, not Him plus anything. Him and Him alone. Christ alone saved me. Now, I've been talking for going on 7 minutes, and we've not read a verse of Scripture other than chapter 3, verse 19. So just bear with me here, and let's go. Chapter 4, verse 1. Let us, therefore, this is first place you see that. You'll see it again at the end of this chapter and several times throughout the book. But let us, Paul's including himself, therefore fear. Fear here is unfortunately confusing to some because the Bible's always telling us fear not, fear not, fear not. But here it just means to have a healthy respect. I heard it put this way: if you're scared of snakes, you have a pretty healthy respect for them. You don't want to go near them. I think what he means here is not so much to fear with trembling, but to just respect. Have a healthy respect for God and understand that if you're going to trust in Him, you've got to trust in Him with your whole heart. And there's some who've not done that. It says, let us therefore fear lest a promise being left us of entering into His rest, any of you should seem to come short of it. Seem to come short of it. This is a difficult passage in and of itself because it makes you wonder about falling short. I think he just means that you need to make sure that you know that your faith and trust is in Jesus Christ. Because if you have any doubts about whether or not you trust Christ, well, then you will find yourself short. It really worries me, this one particular denomination who I'm witnessing my own dealings with them. One of their preachers told me that 1 + 1 = 2 and Jesus plus baptism equals salvation. And I thought, no, I don't know where arithmetic got mixed into the Bible, but 1 + 1 is true. The 1 + 1 = 2 is true. Jesus plus baptism equals salvation is not true. And by mixing a truth and a non-truth together, they're deceiving many. And so, yes, I would have a healthy respect for knowing how I came to know Jesus and knowing that I have for sure that I will enter into His rest and that I will not come short of it because I'm trusting His redemptive work and not my own. Verse 2. For unto us was the gospel preached as well as unto them. But the word preached did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in them that heard it. Now, this clears up verse 1. He's saying the gospel was preached to us, the gospel was preached to them in Canaan, on both sides of the river, before and after they crossed. They were told what would happen. In fact, did you know, and this is neat, I'll preach on this one day. Did you know when they crossed the Jordan, that God parted the waters just like he did the Red Sea, and that when they got on that dry land in the midst of that riverbed, they took 12 stones out and set them on the shore. And then God directed them to take 12 stones from the shore, from that land, and put back in the water on the dry riverbed. 12 stones. And then when they came out of the water covered up those 12 stones. And the act of doing this was a picture of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. You say, how do you figure that? Well, they took the stones they found and they put in there, and they were basically picturing death and burial, and they were covered up by the water, swallowed up by death, so to speak. Well, the ones they carried out of there were a picture of newness and life and resurrection. So they had a monument for years. I don't know if it's still there. I haven't been to Israel, but I know for years, right there on that side of the bank, they had a monument set up, which was a picture of the resurrected Jesus. So, in other words, what Paul's saying here is they were taught the gospel and preached it just like us. But it didn't profit them because they didn't believe it. It wasn't mixed with faith. And faith is what's necessary to be saved. And if you have faith, then you don't have to fear. But this fear is more of a respect anyway. To make sure that you understand, accept, and believe the truth. If you truly believe, you truly believe. I'm not trying to talk you out of it, neither is Paul. But he wanted to make sure that they really believe these things and they weren't just following a crowd. Some of these people you find in churches today, they're just going to go. They don't really believe these things. And as bad as it grieves me, I had a guy coming regularly who enjoyed being a part of a group of people that were loving and good and that ate on certain Sundays on the grounds and sang beautiful songs. And it's just, I had this guy who came and told me he didn't really believe these things. Just thought it was a bunch of stories and thought it was a good time and felt like he fit in. But hey, he didn't fit in. And so, yes, he should have feared because he seemed to come short of it. Okay, verse 3. For we which have believed do enter into rest. Now that's very clear. If your faith is real and you have believed, you do enter into rest. As he said, as I have sworn in my wrath. Now he's quoting Psalm 95 again, I believe, verse 11. But he quotes it several times here. Again, this is what makes Hebrews difficult to study, is because if you're not as familiar with these passages he's quoting and the context wherein they fall, half the battle's context. When you go back and read the Old Testament, if you don't fully understand what they're talking about, then you don't follow where he's going with it. So keep in mind, it's not just knowing where he's quoting from, it's knowing what they're talking about when you get there. He says, for we which have believed do enter into rest. As he said, I've sworn in my wrath, if they shall enter into my rest, although the works were finished from the foundation of the world. For he spake in a certain place of the seventh day on this wise, and God did rest the seventh day from all his works. And in this place again, if they shall enter into my rest, seeing therefore it remaineth that some must enter in therein, and they to whom it was first preached entered not in because of unbelief. All right, we stopped there. This was an illustration from the Old Testament saying all along it's been based on faith and belief. Some entered in and some did not. There's going to be people all the way back to Adam. And I do believe Adam believed in the Christ to come. I really do. I think Adam and Eve will be there. I think Seth will be there. I think a random group of people throughout history will be there. But there will be some who are not. People that I think will surprise us because they didn't truly believe. And so this isn't trying to scare you out of your faith. It's just I want you to examine it. I want you to think about it. Do I really believe these things? Am I truly a believer? Is my faith strong in the Lord? Did I truly get saved? This is the only thing I have against kids getting saved at such a young age. All of my kids have been 7 or younger when they accepted Christ, with the exception of my oldest. He was a little older. But they've all, except the baby, made a profession of faith. But I'll be honest with you, it does scare me. Because only God knows how sincere their heart was or how much they fully understood. I'd like to believe they meant it, and I explained it as best I could. I didn't push it on them. But it's always bothered me because when they're 40 years old and they're trying to think back to that day, they may not remember what they were thinking. They may have doubts. And so my only concern is that you truly believe. If you truly believe, you're saved and nobody can talk you out of it. But if you truly believe, if you truly believed when you got saved, then you don't have a problem. If you had doubts then that's the only thing that scared me. So we need to be careful about these things. I'm out of time. I got to get over to True Choice. I got a lot to do before I go. So I hope that I've at least made you aware of the things that you need to be focused on. But for the most part, this won't shake us that believe. We know these things. It's one of the difficulties about studying this book is it's meant to strengthen and confirm our faith. It's not meant to scare us out of our faith. But there is something to fear if we are not sincere. I'm a poet and didn't know it. All right, you guys have a good day. God bless you. And we'll look to see you again tomorrow as I try to make this a little clearer.